Good day, Gen Xers. Here we are in GenXTalkin on Prepping. My name is Ed Wasson, aka Wilksy. I'm going to be your host today, and alongside me is my good friend Matt Marshall.
Matt Marshall here, checking in.
We try to, in general, be what I call the 3 Ps: positive, professional, and pragmatic. And in doing so, we, in general, like to have a little bit of a spirit of jocularity, a little bit of levity, right? On today's episode, we are covering an extremely serious topic of awareness and prevention of child exploitation. This is probably the most serious thing in my head, right next to terrorism. I've studied terrorism for years. I myself personally consider myself a lifelong student. However, most people that I've actually instructed consider me a subject matter expert because I've worked in those fields, not so much in, like, say, a Navy SEAL type of go get this terrorist type of thing, but intelligence studies, homeland security studies regarding terrorism, counterterrorism, prevention of terrorism, things like this, homegrown violent extremism. And that's an extremely serious topic, obviously. But to me, what we're going to cover today, Matt, is even, to me, more serious. You know, terrorists, like, as horrific and tragic and everything as those guys are, and they're sometimes even blowing themselves up, they have an ideology. So in a way, as sick as I think their mentality is and their strategy or tactic is, I can almost get them. What we're talking about today, Matt, is something that, in my opinion, is just outer limits. It's outside of the realms of what can be accepted at all. So that's child exploitation.
Yeah. And don't let the jocularity, as we had at the beginning, don't let that have anything to do with how serious the actual acts and the disgusting things that we might cover today.
Yeah. Just
conceptually. Don't let that make you think that we don't take this seriously, because there's some, Ed, you brought this up as a possible topic that we could cover on one of the shows. And it actually it made me nervous for a little bit, because I'm thinking to myself, gosh, how do you convey a good, clean message about how to prepare families for such a horrific and disgusting practice without delving too much into the details, because I don't care to dig that much into details. We all can kind of comprehend in the back of our minds, if we let ourselves go dark for just a moment. We can comprehend what we're talking about as far as child exploitation and sex trafficking and those type of things. But it's just a disgusting practice, and I'm excited to that we can get this out, talk to the audience about it, and maybe we can implement some change in the world.
I think the key concept for us to understand here today is the awareness. I think the awareness can hopefully bring about the prevention. What I'm going to do, guys, is, if you're just listening in on it, we are going to be ending up sharing a screen. And the first thing we're going to go over, guys, is how deadly serious this is getting. This is from, I believe this was February of this year. The killing of FBI agents comes amid explosion of child sex abuse reports. As tips about online child sexual abuse have spiked, the FBI is investigating the case of a Florida technology contractor who the Bureau said shot 2 agents executing a search warrant at his apartment. Most of you guys have probably seen this already, so we're months behind, but we really just started the podcast recently, and this is one of the things we did want to go over, and I did want to do this a little bit in honor and remembrance of Special Agents Daniel Alphen and Laura Schwarzenberger, who were slain by this suspect while they were executing the search warrant. This is how serious the matter is getting, probably, with the overall scenario. And what's going on, guys, is these guys right here in America are actually in a preparedness state of mind themselves. Not only are they conducting the heinous crime of child exploitation, and we'll get into that a little bit more, like the definitions of what are we talking about here. These predators, I would venture to guess, possibly tipped off by those television series like To Catch a Predator. They're getting defensive and they're saying, hey, you're not going to catch me. I'm going to do what I want to do. And from what I understood from this story, this guy had set up surveillance cameras on the outside of his apartment, or possibly some type of motion sensor alarms or something like that. So if I read one of the articles right, I think he was tipped off on the inside that there was approaching agents, and he was already prepared. He armed himself. He defended himself. He shot at the agents. After a while, I believe, I don't know what kind of backup they had right there on the scene, but shortly after this guy opened fire, they ended up breaching with the SWAT team, I believe, and he actually died in a gunshot. I don't think he took his own life. I think he died trying to defend. So this is unprecedented. So it's tantamount to know, I think the first most important thing, Matt and I don't want to be alarmist or cause any kind of panic here.
Right.
Because we're going to point out that the statistics show that this scenario is increasing and they are getting more violent. But one of the things we want you to do is remain calm and be prepared, be aware, and hopefully some nugget of information that we might pass along today will enable the prevention of this in the future. So you might observe something that you're able to report, and then you're able to back away and keep away, because you never can tell whatever you're observing over here. You didn't want to investigate it yourself. So I think that's key, is no, it's on the rise, but we're not gonna get alarmist. Number two, these guys are starting to get more violent and not just predatory, but hostile. So this is one of those scenarios. This is not like a 12-year-old you see stealing a candy bar, shoplifting, and you intervene. This is something, if you think you observe the indicators and warnings are suggestive of these types of predators, you just report it. Observe and report, and then back off, right, Matt?
Yeah. You know, you mentioned mentioned statistics. And you and I talked about this just a little bit, about how in preparation for the show and what sort of statistics are out there. And I just did a super quick, super simple search.
There's this I've got one that we're going to share here in a little bit too.
Okay. There is this one. Did you find the thorn.org?
You know what? It's amazingly interesting, because just for our viewers or listeners out there, Matt and I hadn't rehearsed to this level, and he hasn't even brought up Thorn before. Just so everybody knows, it's I believe actually spearheaded by Ashton Kutcher, right?
I think so. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Back when I was working as a financial intelligence unit analyst for an anti-money laundering group in one of the financial institutions that I've worked with in the past, we were actually in discussions with Thorn personnel to see if they had any database with data that they could exchange with us, so we could possibly implement that into our data to see what we could detect and report on and possibly prevent. Yes. So tell them what Thorn is, Matt.
Well, all I wanted to do is I just wanted to share just like 3 main statistics. Okay, on why this becomes so important. I think now there's a whole bunch of statistics that are provided by the Thorn. I'll put it in the show notes, both on the podcast and on our YouTube.
Outstanding.
But there's some numbers that they threw out here on their main page, and that's in 2004, the number of child sexual abuse files reviewed by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. It's about 450,000. 2004.
Right.
Any guesses on what we're at and what we were at in 2019?
2019 and 2020, I think it's like 4 or 5 million.
Very close. 70 million.
Oh, 7. Okay. I knew there's in the million. So it's like, it's just gone off the chart. Yeah.
Massive increase. So, but
there's a
couple of interesting reasons for that if you do a little bit more research in it.
Right.
And I think this is part of what we're going to be talking about. But
exactly.
It says 63% of the people the kids were victimized online.
Yeah.
They were advertised and had been advertised online. So that means kids who had just shared naked photographs of themselves. Those naked photographs had been used across as advertising for these horrific websites that actually traffic in child pornography.
Right.
As many as 1 in 7 runaways reported became victims of sex trafficking.
Yep.
1 in 7 kids that chose to run away. And that's one of the things, I think back to some of my anecdotally thinking of my own family, my older brother and sister, they were ones who decided, hey, we don't want to deal with this stuff. They were, kind of got kind of wrapped up into drugs and things like that. And they wound up leaving the house. And one of the things I've always thought about in raising my own kids is I think it doesn't matter if your kids get wrapped up into drugs or alcohol, or even if it's hard drugs or sex, whatever, doesn't matter. Keep the relationship. Because if you keep the relationship strong with that child, even if as they start getting into adulthood, as they start getting older, keep the relationship. Because if you lose the relationship, you lose the ability to influence them at all.
Yeah.
In any situation, you lose the ability, you lose the leverage that you have in trying to help them through situations. The possibility, even the slight possibility that they would come back to you and ask for help. Yeah. You lose that if you lose the relationship. It's something, the main reason these kids, I'm not going to say the main reason because I don't know this statistically, but one of the reasons why these kids leave their families is because they've lost the relationship with their family, with their parents. So if they lose the relationship, then we as parents lose the ability to help them ever in life,
Yeah, it's really interesting you bring that up because I can actually kind of relate. Recently, we've had one of our family members as recently as about 4 or 5 years ago. They were strung out on drugs, but we remained with a very strong relationship. So that person has now done a 180 turnaround flip script, and now they're a young mother, very, very good, loving mother, and we still have maintained that strong relationship. So that's there. We just saw this person a couple of weekends ago. So there's that. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I have other family members that, for whatever reasons, whatever silly little mistake I made over 30 years ago, like when we were 17 years old or whatever, and knocking on doors or whatever in the middle of the night or something almost that stupid. There's there are a couple of family members out there that have practically forsaken me. And guess what? The relationship's not there. And I didn't even do drugs or anything else like that. So at this point in time, to be honest with you, there's no relationship there. So it's completely severed. They can go pack sand for all I care. I'm not talking to them. Before we go, let's go into the statistics first. So I'm going to share screen again. This information is, if I can get to it, there we go, is from the site is Enough is Enough. I don't know exactly when they published this. You guys, if you're not just listening to the podcast, you can see this portion. And it is, if you're just listening to it, you can see it is at enough.org/stats_exploitation. It has sexual predators, exploitation, child pornography, and without really reading into everything in here and stuff that Matt has already gone over. You see some of those statistics years. For example, TikTok saw removals of nearly double between 2019 and 2018. YouTube has seen a 169% surge in removals between 2018 and 2020. We're going to tell you in my training and experience, which has touched upon this type of stuff in actual investigations, there are reasons that the numbers are going up, and the reasons are many, but we do want to arm you with the information of this statistical information that is out there and available for your further review. And then from my training and experience, I'm going to go over these other things. Like one of the important acronyms you're going to see a lot of is CSAM or CSAM. That is child sex abuse material. CSAM is going to be in a lot of these reports, guys. So you're going to see that a lot. There's certain areas, regions, and countries where there's a little bit more of a predilection towards overall human smuggling. And then there's areas where they are known to do more sexual material oriented type stuff in general. I can't get involved in all of the details because some of the details are law enforcement sensitive, in my opinion, with this group right here, HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, who we met with about 4 or 5 years ago. There's certain groups that review activity in certain regions all the time. And these intelligence analysts working on different projects, specializing in different regions, pulling up a globe map, and I'm going over Latin America right now. So what we call LATAM. There's certain types of criminal activity and what we call organized criminal groups or criminal enterprises, transnational criminal enterprises, et cetera, operating throughout Latin America. That's south of the border, what we call SWB, southwest border. So you have southwest border is all these states bordering here: California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and sometimes they actually consider Florida in that as well. They're directly bordering with Mexico. However, with Florida is very close to Cuba and other areas where there's a lot of various issues or threats or vulnerabilities due to the migrant issues. A lot of that is human smuggling. For the most part, this type of activity is going to be geared more towards overall human smuggling and human trafficking, mostly for the exploitation purposes as monetary or financial overall. And there's a lot of narcotic smuggling along those corridors as well. When we say like US to Latin America to US, this is what we consider a corridor. So we have analysts that are doing country corridor and regional type studies. They review so much information and so much data on a day-to-day basis. These people are SMEs. They're subject matter experts. And it's not just this region or whatever. There's certain things going on in West Africa. There's certain other things going on in South Africa and East Africa. There's certain things going on in what we call HOA, the Horn of Africa region. Remember what a while back there was the piracy. There's certain things going on in Central Africa, and up here is what we have North Africa. In this region over here is usually lumped together in what we call MENA, MENA, Middle East and North Africa. So there's issues going on here. Over here on the East Coast, the East, what would be the East Coast of the Far East, like China and stuff, from French Indochina area like Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Burma, or Myanmar as it's called now, China, stuff like that. You still have the Silk Route. That Silk Route goes up here past up and around Pakistan, Afghanistan, and what we call the stands, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, etc. There's still a silk route going on there, and it comes up from Southeast Asia all the way up and around, and it terminates sometimes all the way through Turkey. You have Caspian Sea, Caucasus, Azerbaijan, Black Sea, criminal organizations, whether it's the Russian mafia involved in some of that, Chinese triads. Here in this area of Europe, you still have little mafias in the Balkans regions, Italy. International crime, guys, is so prevalent, and it's just so pervasive that in one of the episodes of Anthony Bourdain, when he's in Italy, he's talking to Italians, and they're saying, the mafia out here is just part of life. We don't think that the government can operate any better. Mm. So you just, and that's one thing to consider. Another thing to consider is that mafia and criminal organizations have children and friends and family members that have actually deeply infiltrated most of the governments. Most of the governments, and there's statistics, there's charts for anti-money laundering type purposes. There's the Know Your Country anti-money laundering country reports that have everything in there, from the State Department, the CIA fact book, everything in there, whether it's drug issues, whether it's issues of governance and corruption. All those factors are in there for all these analysts to peruse and pore over. So if you're traveling anywhere, you can feel free to just type in KYC AML Azerbaijan, and you will see everything from the CIA fact book, everything from the State Department, everything in there from drug and narcotic trafficking, any other transnational border issues. That information's all out there, guys. The problem is we can't stop all of this criminal activity because there's just too much of it. There's too much information. There's too much of an appetite for the wares that these guys are selling, whether it's just DVD burns of pirated movies, or whether it's webcams of sexual exploited persons, whether they're adults or minors. So you got all that kind of stuff going on out there regionally, globally. And just so you know, statistically, guys, the US is one of the, I think it's the #1 consumer of all sexual material, especially child sexual material. It's either #1 or #2. It's also in the top producing. And over here in this area, in Eastern Europe, Romania is known to have whole apartment complexes where usually adult females are doing webcam services. So there's one of your top producers of that. So pornography overall is a multi-billion-dollar a year industry, guys, and there's just too much of an appetite for it. It's just like drugs. It's not going to go away anytime soon. It's considered more of a vice. If it's consenting adults that are portrayed in these enactments, and it's consenting adults purchasing the material that they produce, that's in most cultures considered more of not ethical, but more of a moralistic
moral challenge. Yep.
Yeah, a moral challenge or a vice. It's not considered a crime in most jurisdictions until or unless it's depicting something that appears to be not consensual, or if it's with children. In almost all jurisdictions globally, they have definitions for child. In the US, we have an overall general definition that's 18, anything under 18.
Yeah.
Once they hit 18, even if they're still living with their parents, if they want to engage in something like this, there's still legal pieces that have to be in place, like the ID checks, paperwork, everything else like that. So they're signing certain releases where they're verifying, #1, they're adult. #2, they're getting 2 forms of ID, picture government issued IDs in most cases, usually a passport and or a driver's license, and they're signing at the bottom that they were not coerced in any way, shape, or form, things like this. So there's a little bit of a safeguard in place even for the adult material. However, here's where there's no blurry lines whatsoever. In America, especially, if they are not 17, they are anybody producing and consuming any type of that material is go to club bedtime. You are going to a federal prison for a while, and you're going to be labeled a chicken licker or a child pederast. And that is not a label that you want to understand your next door neighbor having. In some cases, they have safeguards for these guys in place where they're going to try to relocate them after they get out of prison in most cases. And you can still look them up, and they are supposed to register as a sex offender, especially a child sex offender. That's where most of these violators are. If they've raped somebody and that's an adult, that's one thing. They're already a sex offender. They're going to be a registered sex offender, and that's bad enough. Mm-hmm. However, coupled with the fact that these guys are getting more and more prepared and they're getting more vigilant and defensive about their habit, if you want to call it that, they're also disguising their identity for a variety of purposes, because when they move into the next neighborhood, although they're a registered child sex offender or whatever, they don't want anybody to know it. So of course, this guy next door is not going to introduce himself to you as, Charles Manson, the chicken licker. And I know that sounds like a disgusting term, but I want to throw it out there because it is a term that is generally used in the law enforcement world and in some of the prisons. And that I think it's a term that I like a bad name for them. I think we want to give them a bad name because if you're an adult and you have a vice, let's say, I don't even care if you're using marijuana or drinking or you're gambling or whatever, that's a lot of it we consider a little bit of a vice or habit or whatever, or if it's a little bit of pornography, whatever, you can consider it moralistic, a moral flaw, a vice, or whatever. Sex crimes, and especially sex crimes against children, that is a completely different matter. What are your thoughts on all that, Matt?
It's tough because when you originally brought this up to me, I did a little bit of research. I think one of the things I found was really interesting about this, as I looked at like that the Mama Bear Effect website.
Right. And we'll go over that in a minute too.
Yeah, it seems to be focused more on young children, younger, right, like toddlers and 6 to 10-year-olds. And I'm thinking, gosh, could it be, that even they need to be worried about it? But then, you go to thorn.org, and that seems to be more in the 12 to 17-year-old youth and so on. And it's a different discussion. It really is a different discussion from one to the other. Right. But one of the interesting things I think was very, very valuable from the Mama Bear is, I'll name two things. Number one, that most of the attacks, I'll even call it, come from people who the children know. It's not coming from some international terrorist or international criminal organization necessarily. That's not to say those don't exist and that they're not heavily involved in the sexual trafficking and exploitation of children, but it's people that they know, that the kids know. And it was, oh my gosh, it was. Anyways, we're going to be talking a little bit more about the Mama Bear Effect, which is a pretty powerful website. It's strange because it also made me think, to understand, I should say, that people don't want to talk about it. And it's interesting in this world. They're trying to teach, like the Mama Bear stuff is trying to teach children that it's their body. Yeah. And they should be able to protect their body and tell people, no, I don't want you touching me. I don't want you touching me there. I don't want you touching me at all. Don't want to hug, whatever it may be. Children should be able to say that. And yet it seems in the media, and it seems in a lot of, I'm not going to say right or left, but I think we can all guess, in certain sides of the argument, they're saying kids should have the freedom to express themselves the way they want, and they should have the freedom to engage in relationships how they want to engage in relationships. And I'm like, well, no, you need to teach them that that's wrong.
Yeah,
that situation is not right.
Right.
It's not just like you put it, it's not just a vice like drinking or smoking or gambling. It's not just a vice. This is causing irreparable damage on a young child that has no control over what the adult is doing to them.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point. I'm not going to get super detailed on that, but there's whole advocacy groups for that, like NAMBLA. That's an actual group, the North American Man Boy Love Association, that a lot of other people are just trying to separate themselves from, and everything else like that. And it goes into a difference between and those that's a homosexual pederasty, and those guys are like, most of them, I think they prefer the right around the prepubescent, and that's where we start getting into different definitions. So like you mentioned before, it's different discussions. So there's a different discussion about, let's say, NAMBLA and other advocacy for that thing that most people consider an offensive habit. And then there's a different discussion about one of the main crimes in this overall arena that Homeland Security investigations and others end up prosecuting, is what they call interstate trafficking of a minor. Now, what that predominantly, in my experience, deals with, and I'm not an agent or anything, I haven't made the arrest, but I read hundreds of these types of reports because we've ended up finding networks of these people in some activity that I review. And HSI may have made an arrest or two here or there, and here's 2 or 3 of these people on my chart, but they're in a network of like 15 other people. That's when we send in a report to, well, the report doesn't necessarily go directly to HSI. It can in some instances. So in that type of situation, I have that experience to where I understand when they're saying in a news, generally in a Department of Justice press release, this interstate sex trafficking of minors ring has been busted. A lot of times it's like the St. Louis area, and they're in Missouri, Illinois, Kentucky, and it's adults about 25 to 35 that are trying to be pimps of generally girls that are about 16 or 17. So that's a whole different thing. And it's, in my opinion, it's interstate sex trafficking of a minor. I'm good with that criminal definition or that headline. When we talk about child exploitation, a lot of these, like you say, the thorn side is focusing more on like the prepubescent or the pubescent, right around 12 to 17 or so. They're still a minor.
Yes.
By legal definition, there's a variety of things that they cannot make a decision on. They can't get married. They can't drink. They can't vote. They can't own or buy or fire a firearm, all kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
What makes anybody think that they can knowingly, willingly, willfully, with full cognizance engage in a relationship? If it's, and especially that's just going to be sex. You're not going to have a meaningful,
loving relationship,
loving human relationship with a child. That is where we delineate from. We can
and that's the thing, is the adult knows that.
The
adult knows that.
Yeah, and that's a big actual prosecuting point for other crimes.
Yeah.
When somebody is holding a position of power or authority over somebody, that enhances the crime. I don't believe it enhances the crime in many cases with child exploitation, because you're using your position of power, authority, your position in the family or relationship with that child against that child. And you're kind of trying to like trick them in a lot of ways. Like, you love me, and this is, everybody touches themselves like this or whatever. And that's where you get completely derailed from the realms of reality, I think. And that doesn't even happen in the areas of Afghanistan or tribal AFPAC areas where they're into the Chai boys a lot. And that's a cultural thing in Afghanistan, by the way. That is not like a criminally offensive vice that most of the rest of the world considers. The Afghan Chai boy scenario is like up to about a 12-year-old, and it's a different scenario in my opinion, whereas they still have a sexual exploitation scenario, and that's part of their culture that those embedded journalists with CNN with the Taliban still cannot and will not influence. That's part of their culture, and it's a cultural norm, and there's no law against that in their tribes and regions and things like that. Here in the rest of the world, we have said at certain ages there's certain things, and at certain ages they are a child. They are not an adult. They cannot make these types of decisions.
Yeah.
For those that are going prepubescent, most of those offenders who are the worst, in my opinion, those guys are going for typically like 4-year-olds. So that's the thing.
You're talking about the Afghan side.
No, okay. That's in the US. That's in the US, Europe, everywhere else. Like Afghans don't like 4-year-olds in my experience.
And let's clarify, we're not saying that all Afghans are like this. We're saying that that's a cultural thing that happens in that is not prosecutable. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's not prosecutable in their area. It's a cultural thing with many of the tribes out there. The U.S. Army had a human terrain team report where, there were rumors nobody really knew about. There was some speculation, this and that and the other, but they actually did a lot of surveying and everything else like that. And they actually have like DVDs and even still like VHS tapes where they're showing this part of the culture. So it's not something that the Taliban want to wave their flag about,
right?
But it's actually very predominant in a lot of the Taliban-like Pathan or Pashtun, especially culture in that region. And like I said, we're not saying like all Afghans are like that, and we're not saying that necessarily it's a bad thing in that context, because for them it is culturally accepted. They don't have definitions for child. They don't have laws against it. Whereas over here we have taken on a different moral stance, and our legal system has actual defined legal terms for adult and child.
And I think that's important. But one of the things that's challenging is as we as an America, as a United States, as we start to change our and lax some of our rules on, and it's hard for me to even say rules, but some of the laws of immigrants, people coming into the country and effectively bringing their culture with them.
Yeah.
It's one of the challenges is it seems like certain people want to say we should respect the culture, respect their culture that they're bringing in, and allow them to. Where do you draw the line? If that's accepted in their culture, because there is no legal definition between adult and child, and they're free to have sex with whatever age they want, or whatever the rules are in their culture. If they bring that culture into the United States or other Western cultures, where do you draw the line on that?
Well, for something like that gets into a deeply civilization and cultural type of discussion. Whereas in that particular instance and scenario, I don't think that they would openly display it at all. I've never heard of a case where, let's say it's somebody from that region, whatever tribe or ethnicity or whatever they are, and they have had a Chai boy scenario here in the US or even Canada. Are they, as a matter of fact, most of the folks that come over here end up being a little bit more pious, and they actually assimilate more than most people actually
that's
realize.
what I would hope, right? That's what I would hope.
And that's something about homeland security and terrorism type topic discussions right here in the U.S. because we have a lot of Palestinians, Lebanese, whoever else that they come from families directly linked to Hezbollah or other terrorist groups. Like what group we would consider OFAC listed and sanctioned terrorist group, like formally, legally named. This is a terrorist group. However, that's a family member. That's a cousin or whatever in southern Lebanon or wherever they're from, and they're going to have family support. And they may or may not wave the yellow Hezbollah flag right here in the United States. I've heard of instances of that in the Dearborn, Michigan area. And to be honest with you, for the most part in America, most of the Muslims that come in are actually rather fundamental. Now, here's where we get into the difference between the definition of fundamental and extremist. Do you want to espouse Sharia law and maybe proselytize it here in America? That you are completely protected under our Constitution to legally do that.
Yeah, right.
Now, are you going to go publicly chant death to America and actually actively try to recruit people to be suicide bombers here in America? You can't do that because since 9/11 and those types of scenarios that happened around Finsbury Park Mosque in London, we have said, okay, freedom of speech only this far, because you can't actually say that. It's like you can't say fire in a movie theater or bomb in an airplane. You're causing a disturbance. It's at the very least disturbing the peace, things like that. With trying to promulgate even online, if you're in America, no matter where you're from, even if you're an American, whether let's say you're Antifa or a 3% or something like that, if you get online, no matter how crafty you think you are with your privacy and your code words and everything else like that, if you say we're going to march on January 6th and we're going to go in and blow up Nancy Pelosi's seat or something like that, that's encouraging a terroristic act of violence.
That is act of violence. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can get prosecuted for that. That is not a protected right or freedom of speech issue at that point. No matter how much of a revolution you think it needs to be or whatever, but to not digress too much further on that, so that we've gone over those rough definitions in my experience of what like interstate sex trafficking of a minor. Generally, we got 17 to 35-year-old, generally drug also dealing thugs in some kind of gang, trying to pimp out their little 14 to 17-year-old gangbang sisters. And that's what they call them. They're members of gangs often say they're gangbangers or whatever. We're not talking and we're using these terms in instructional purposes, by the way, just so everybody knows. We're not trying to be lewd. And there's gangs, and when they conduct gang activity, whether it's slinging drugs or trying to fight off a rival gang in the next neighborhood, or pimping out their girlfriends or female gang members for prostitution and the production of pornography. That, in general, they're going to call those activities sometimes gang banging. That is a prosecutable offense that also, because it's interstate, it's going to go to the federal court level. You didn't just go do this in St. Louis, Missouri. You're also here in, you were here in Decatur, Illinois. You were in Knoxville. You went all the way to Knoxville, or maybe just to Louisville, Kentucky, etc. So interstate sex trafficking of a minor is one thing. Child exploitation is that other thing. And there's scenarios like one of the things Matt and I want to make sure we warn our listeners and viewers about is we strongly suggest and recommend that you do not try to go online and use Tor, the onion router, and try to peruse dark websites. One of the groups that I was in, I talked to Matt about this earlier. One of the groups that I was in doing intelligence type studies and homeland security type studies was discussing and debating this idea. There are law enforcement intelligence analysts. There are military intelligence analysts that may be doing. I know there's some that do it. I don't know so much on the military side, because a lot of those guys are actually military juniors that are 19 to 24 themselves. They're E1 through E4 or 5 or so. And it's bad enough that we're making them collect and analyze intelligence about terrorism and other crime. In general, I've never seen a military intelligence outfit that's actually got its guys digging into the dark web. So we want to make sure everybody knows the difference between the deep web and the dark web. Matt, tell them the differences. I know you know this better than I do.
No, I'm interested because all the study that I've done and the understanding of it tends to focus on the dark web,
right?
Which is just that accessibility and well, you can get to the dark web in multiple different ways, of course, but the intention is to do it in secrecy, and the intention is to do just about anything you can imagine. And I think the most important thing, Ed, that you had expressed to me in our discussions about this is protect yourself from this stuff, because
absolutely,
there are things that you can see that you cannot unsee.
Exactly.
And I have an image in my head of something that I have seen while doing my investigations on the dark web, and it's impossible not to see it. It's kind of like, imagine an elephant. How can you not imagine an elephant? If you even just get an inkling of remembering that thing that you once saw years ago.
Yep.
And you go, that is disgusting. And I'll never want to go to the dark web again because of that, or whatever it might be. I think that's an important point. Doesn't matter, but when it comes to it, dark web is it can be an incredibly dangerous place to hang out, to do any investigation.
Now, if you are a member of an international criminal organization or transnational criminal organization, maybe you spend most of your day on the dark web. So it's a different thing. And they're used to it, and they are completely desensitized or whatever. However, if you're like probably 99.999% of most of the rest of us regular Joe and Jane Americans and Westerners, if you go on the dark web, you have a potentiality of seeing something in there that could actually, in my opinion, scar you. I know I've been scarred, but for everybody's knowledge, the deep web is defined as a portion of the internet that is hidden and not shown from conventional search engines. Now, the dark web is a subset of the deep web, which is intentionally hidden. You have to have the onion router, and you have to have encryption and specialty software. And I'm going to pull up and share screen real quick an illustration of what there's an actual illustration of deep web versus dark web.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I'll share screen of it real quick as it's trying to get to the picture, and apparently this isn't the picture. This is not the picture I want. And it shows you where this stuff is at as well. So here we go, guys. I'll share my screen. And for those not viewing, I'll read it out. On the surface, you have the surface web, your Wikipedia, your Google, your Bing, the cloud, etc. In the deep web, you have even stuff like government resources and academic information, but a lot of that stuff, it may not be open to the public. And then you go down to the bottom where it's the dark web, and that's where you have hackers, you have illegal porn, you have the Tor encrypted sites and stuff like this. And this is where a lot of these guys doing child exploitation for the CSAM, child sexual abuse material, they put this stuff out there. But they do, for your information, they do have, I'll stop sharing this right now, give people, anybody else that's watching this, they can pause it whenever and take a snippet of it if they want to. I'm going to stop sharing, and Matt and I'll continue our discussion. But they do, the child exploiters do have online, just basic internet sites that they go to. I won't discuss because I personally think it might be law enforcement sensitive. Also, if you try this method, a lot of the sites are going to block you, or by typing in some of these sites, you will actually alert law enforcement that you might be one of these type of predators.
Yeah.
So I'm not, for those reasons, I'm not going to tell you what these sites are, but what I will tell you is they are open internet, basic internet sites that are usually image sharing sites where somebody, if you're in your neighborhood and you see somebody with a camera and lens like this is a huge telephoto lens, and it's if they're not on like a model shoot, high school senior shoot, an engagement type shoot or something like that, they're not doing real estate, they're not doing wildlife. You got to wonder, why is somebody typically over 60, 65 years old just walking through usually the playground with a camera with that type of lens on it? Number one. Number two, they're taking pictures of kids that they either have access to or in general they want to gain access to, and they're going to try to groom those kids.
Mm-hmm.
And on the open internet, they're going to show people about 6 different images of each child at about the age of 3 to 6 or so. That's where most of the child molester types, that's their realm, is about 3 or 4 to maybe 6 or 7. That's their spot. They'll show these pictures on the open internet, and it is to lure the other people in, to let them know their other friends. They share, they do image sharing, and they buy and sell images among a little community of these types of people. And those pictures of the kids fully clothed at the playground are to let others in their community know, I have more pictures of these kids, and they're in my van, they're in my house, and they're obviously, of course, not clothed. So
we got to think, Ed, we got to think of another term for community. There's got to be another term, because community implies something a bit together and good.
Yeah, you're true. You're right about that.
When you say these people's community, this is like an insidious group.
Yeah,
it's a nasty group. It's a group.
They're not pirates or something like that. They're not a community. They're not a criminal organization, because they're not organized. They don't actually, a lot of these guys, they're loosely connected because in general, they don't form a bond. And they're like thieves. So they say there's no honor among thieves. These guys have no honor either. They're going to rat on their friends or other things like this. They don't really have friends. And it's not a community, but it's a loose knit group of like-minded individuals, I guess you could say.
Like-minded, diseased.
They share the same mental issue. Yeah. I mean, I think we can all agree that if you're, who is that rock and roll piano player, Great Balls of Fire guy? Let me try to look that up. What was his name?
Great Balls.
Jerry Lee Lewis.
Oh, yeah.
There's a big difference. I think we can all agree. There's a difference between Jerry Lee Lewis type that is somehow infatuated with his 14-year-old cousin.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're like 18 or 19 years old and you have a girlfriend that's maybe 16 or so, something like that, there's differences. There's different levels of a lot of what people will tolerate and won't tolerate. But at the end of the day, what we have to truly understand and recognize is that as a society and a community at large, as a nation, our nation and our states have actual written definitions and laws for adult and child and things like this, and things that they will punish you for, and things like if it's an 18-year-old or 19, maybe even 25-year-old boy or whatever, and it's a 16-year-old girl, they may or may not punish that. If it's if they say, well, she got emancipated from her family, she's got her paperwork in or whatever, things like this. So there's different levels. And there's Jerry Lee Lewis, I think his cousin was 14 or whatever when they started seeing each other. But this level here, number one, there's criminal enterprises where the sexual exploitation of the minors in interstate sex trafficking, that's a criminal enterprise first and foremost. So all, they're probably going to also get busted with narcotics, prostitution and soliciting and such, and producing child sexual abuse material, because the state is generally going to try to consider the girl under 18, she's 17 or below, they're going to consider her a minor. Thus it's child sexual abuse material, because you were taking pictures, you were doing video or whatever else, you were selling it. So you're going to get prosecuted for a pretty high level federal felony. And those guys are going to, and typical in general, I don't know what the sentences that they serve end up being in actuality. They could get time off for good behavior or whatever. Maybe they're out in 5 or 10 years, but in general, they're going to be going to a federal penitentiary for some years.
Hey, let me ask you a question, and maybe you know this, maybe you don't. I'm not sure, but in your experience, now movies portray these guys, as older white guys typically, and they're sitting there with a big old camera, like you said, and they're out at the playground and they're taking pictures of the children running around, and they're trying to walk up with their big white van with no windows. So I've got this image in my mind based on movies. But you just mentioned something that's of interest, and that's they probably would get prosecuted for narcotics, for prostitution, for these other things, which you typically think of in more gang related organizations, which is not necessarily that older guy who's sitting in a van somewhere. So I'm wondering what are your thoughts on that?
I think there's different levels and different strata, and just to clarify,
so different groups,
right? So there's the sex trafficking of minors, that those guys are in the gangs and they're generally a little bit younger. And then there's child exploitation.
I see.
And for the most part, I don't believe you're going to run into the guys that are actually trying to take pictures of them at the park. If you do, Matt and I are encourage you to just report that, observe and report. But for the most part, those guys, they are over 60, 65 years old. They're white Americans. You may be tipped off if they're loners. I think in general, they probably have pretty poor hygiene. You don't see them socializing with hardly anybody else. You might see them going to a Walmart or CSV or something like that to do a wire transfer to somebody that they don't know. That's sounds like a girl's name in the Philippines. Things like that are some of those clues, and most of those guys are in their 60s. It's about 65 or so. So with that, Matt, we'll go to the screen sharing of the mama bear flags. So we see what some of those flags are. And guys, this is not the be all end all of the flags. For those that are not viewing, but they're just listening, we're on a site called the mamabeareffect.org/red flags of child predators. So you can actually Google this. You don't need the website. You can Google Mama Bear Effect, red flags of child predators, or you can just say red flags of child probably, and you're going to come up with this site.
Yeah.
And this is a very good page right here that they've got for keeping kids safe from sexual abuse. Right off the bat, like Matt and I are struggling with a lot of these definitions and chatting and discussion with you. they're saying it's not a black and white issue. Even experts on the issue who have interviewed convicted child molesters remark how likable they appear, how
Yeah.
there's a lot
Yeah.
of different scenarios, a lot of the gray areas. But as Matt and I are saying, our main focus for this is preparedness and awareness and possible prevention of these types of scenarios. Our hope and goal is to provide you with the information to at least be aware that these, number one, these scenarios are out there. Number two, they're on the rise. But again, we want to go back to those statistics and say, why are they on the rise? Is it really a spike in actual activity? Well, it probably is a little bit of a spike in actual activity, but most of it's probably like 16 or 17-year-old girls going on Snapchat.
Yeah.
And
Right.
yeah, so we've already known that a lot of those, some of these studies came back at sometimes 3 or 4 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
that this was happening. Kids as young as 15 or so are starting to get more and more into sexting, and it's another one of those vices. It's like smoking cigarettes, smoking marijuana, starting to drink alcohol or something like that. Kids at that age of risk, parents, they're at that age of risk. They're starting to be 14, 15, 16 in those teens where they're starting to really push their boundaries, and they're going to try to push you. And that's at that age where you're going to want to start, maybe even for their own protection, snooping on their devices and stuff. You're still ultimately responsible for these kids legally
Yeah.
until they're over 18 or over and out of your house and stuff. And I think there's a certain amount of freedom you want them to have an experience, but as a parent, that freedom is earned in a lot of ways, and you still have them under your guidance and certain restrictions for their protections. Because our stepdaughter, when this was a couple of years ago, we found that she was actually trying to get on sugar daddy sites, her and some of her friends. Why? They said they were doing it for fun and as a game. This is where we stepped in, and we had a talk with them. Did we spy on them a little bit? Yes. Was it for a good reason? Yes.
Absolutely.
Did we find out something that was potentially hazardous to them? Yes. Did we prevent it? Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting. To that point, there was some. I'm skipping ahead slightly, but I found it interesting that some of these sites, when it comes to that, sharing nude photography of yourself,
Yeah,
that's a huge problem these days for youth, for under 18, and in particular, as you mentioned, 13. I would even go down as far as 13 to 17-year-olds, because those are the ones who like are significantly into the Snapchats and the TikTok and so on, and trying to share and of course, I mean, most of them don't use texting anymore. It's mostly Snapchat. But they said something to the tune of 40% of teens agree it's normal for people their age to share nude pictures of themselves. 40%, 40% of kids, almost half of them think it's normal to take nude pictures and send them. That's disgusting. I mean, you that they get that into their mind somehow. And then half of them also believe that they will be shamed if their parents find out. Now, granted, it will be shameful. It'll be oh my gosh, I can't believe you did this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But every parent in their mind should be thinking, if this ever happened to my child, you need, like we mentioned early, you need to maintain the relationship. Keep that relationship, because if you don't, they're going to go off to the adult that they just sent the nudes to and think that person's going to help them and save them.
Yeah. And that was a huge thing that we actually discussed before we approached the stepdaughter. I stumbled on it. I told my wife, and then we had a discussion, and we said, this is what we don't want to do. And we basically broached the topic with her and said, look, you might get a little bit upset, but we were snooping a little bit. We saw this. We're not shaming you, but we're telling you this is unacceptable. You are exposing yourself to entirely too much hazard, because We did see some incoming messages where there was people wanting to try to make a meeting or a rendezvous.
Yeah,
And we're like,
exactly.
are you out of your mind? Have you
Yeah,
not seen Liam Neeson's Taken and
right.
Taken 2 and Taken 3? The daughter never learned,
Yeah.
right?
And McMafia. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, these shows, I mean, they portray it so well in some of these shows about how quickly and unexpected these things can happen,
And
and it's just,
this stuff is happening, and it's not just to just any kids, it's to even rich kids.
yeah,
With that girl 10 or so years ago that disappeared out of Bermuda or the Bahamas, and we still don't know where she is for sure.
yeah, right, right.
But there was a lot of speculation that, I mean, think of it, if you're one of the predators internationally that is a multi-millionaire Saudi or something like that, not to pick on a nationality or something like that, but
Yeah.
to say, if you have the money and power and influence and you prefer not just like Jeffrey Epstein did, like any girl that's like 16 or so and going to high school, let's say you want to pick the cream of the crop. You
Yeah,
want to pick one of a kid that's more refined and coming from a more rich and affluential family. You have the money for that. You can actually try to pay somebody for that. It's just like paying anybody else. You can pay basic street criminals to try to abduct that kid for you.
yeah, right,
And it
right.
happens. It actually happens.
Yeah,
Now we're saying, Matt and I aren't hitting a panic button or trying to get anybody frantic. It's
agreed.
not a common everyday scenario, but there are sites you can go to where you can look up people's names to see if they're on the sex offender list. There's
Yeah,
sites like this Mama Bear Effect where you can become informed and become aware of what some of these things are, like strangers versus acquaintances.
yeah,
Do people conspicuously volunteer to work with children,
yeah,
even
right.
though they don't have children of their own? Do they spend more time with children than adults or other peers? Do they have a favorite child that they seem to really like? Do they conspicuously and unnecessarily give gifts or special privileges for no apparent reason?
Right.
Things like this, the hugging, the tickling, wrestling, um, things like this, long stares or periods of watching the child.
Yeah, right.
There's all these red flags in here, guys, on this mama bear effect. And it tells you in the beginning, the offenders may not display all of these, or maybe even any of you might stumble upon something that's not even on this list.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of these, but they have a whole long list of some or most of the typically seen red flags for known convicted child molesters. And
So
they're listed here.
here's an interesting example. Again, I speak anecdotally here, so I'm not talking any major statistics, but when we moved out here, we got to know a family very, very closely, our real estate agent. And that this father invited us to their church. We wound up going to the church, spent a lot of time there. Wound up going to the small group in this family's home. My oldest son became best friends with one of the children, one of the other boys. Spent hours and hours over at that house, spending the night. So over and over and over again. After about 5-6 years, something like that, of us doing this and going through all this, we get this report from the church that says this particular person has committed some thing. We don't know what it was.
Oh man.
And we're like, I wonder what that is. We know these people, so we should go talk to them.
Oh
right.
no.
So my wife called the wife and found out, and they were really, really good friends. We're all very good friends. We spent years together. Right.
Yeah.
And my wife gets out of the wife that, turns out that the husband was sexually abusing one of the daughters for years.
Yeah.
For years, and nobody knew it.
Yeah.
And immediately, the first thing my wife asks is, okay, are there any indications that our son was affected in any way? No, no indications of that. We went to our son, we talked to him about it, but it was like, and the rift, the what that causes in an actual community. I'm going to use the word community because it was a beautiful community that we had at the time, but the rift that it caused was tremendous. It was an absolute upheaval. The church completely disintegrated and went in different directions. It was
irreparable,
incredibly destructive. Yep.
Matt, I hate to say it, but you bring up a huge and significant point here with all this, so all other viewers or listeners can understand about the sensitivity to this as well.
Yeah.
This goes to the different cultures of different regions discussion that we had earlier.
Yeah.
Those guys are not going to, announce that. If anything like that happened in their family, or they're not going to let you know either. My cousin was killed in an attack against the American consulate in Yemen or something like that. They're going to keep quiet about it. And if anybody in their community finds out about it, their whole community is going to also remain silent about it, because they're going to, especially if they're in America or even Canada. Just so you guys know, to our friends in the Great White North up there, your Canadian Security and Intelligence Services, CSIS, your version of the CIA, they are on it like a cheap suit. These guys are all over terrorism, child exploitation. They're extremely good partners with America. Your Royal Canadian Mounted Police as well. That's almost like the Canadian version of the FBI. Those communities are going to they're going to be really insulated about stuff like that. That's why they have to obfuscate all of their family remittances back home. They, in general, do it above board with regular money service businesses or whatever. They have a business, or they have however they're making money here in North America and Europe. They're sending money back home, but they don't even want to draw too much attention to that, because they're concerned about any type of scrutiny that might place upon them. Same, it goes with their community and our community. When it comes to a case like this, they will actually be in denial about that kind of scenario playing out.
Yeah.
Ever even occurring. And in North America, like you said, it can devastate a church, and there's some mega churches in this area. We know of a church in Texas. I'm not going to name the name because I don't even remember what the name was, but I had a very close friend that I think he was actually going to this church, and I think they actually had a soccer league. And number one, he got really pissed off at them because they played against somebody that went after his wife and actually maliciously tackled her and broke her leg. And it was just really egregious. And she was in a cast and traction for a long time. I may be speaking out of turn here a little bit, so I don't want to get too detailed with exactly who it is and what group they were in and all this other kind of stuff. But I know he did speak out against, I think he was one of many actually that spoke out against I think it's a mega church in this area.
Mm-hmm.
They had a missionary couple in Africa, and the only thing that the community knows was that the church pulled the plug on them and brought them back. And the next thing they knew, that couple had gotten a divorce. And I think eventually they found out he was going to be going to prison for a while.
Yeah.
It eventually came out that while he was out there, he had a computer that they found some child pornography on.
Yeah.
And if any of our listeners figure out what I'm talking about and they find out I'm saying the wrong exact information, I'm going to apologize in advance, because I don't know exactly all the details of how it played out, because one of the main reasons is the church intentionally kept a lot of this stuff extremely hush hush
or vague. Yeah.
Vague.
Yeah.
So I think the church is so big and powerful that it actually had it pretty minimized in news and everything else. And so I don't know if he went to prison. I do believe the couple did get a divorce. I believe he was at least investigated, and I don't know what all else happened after that. But
Yeah.
from what I
want
understand,
to I want to clarify one thing. Okay, I'm a Christian, and I don't want to make it sound like this happens in all churches, right?
Yeah.
This is one of the things, just like the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Oh my God, the Catholic Church is so horrible now because a number, and it's a pretty big number, but a number of people were investigated and accused of, and will eventually, I'm sure, be tried for molestation of children. I'm not saying the Christian faith or churches in general are horrible places, because it is everywhere. It can be anywhere. And the whole point of this discussion is to let people know we want to bring this back to preparedness.
Right.
The whole idea is to have you be prepared as a parent, as a grandparent. We're Gen Xers, grandparents now, right? And that's one of the things that we need to be prepared for, is to have discussions with kids, with teenagers, with even young adults, and letting them know you're getting into dangerous territory when you play these games.
Right. Exactly, Matt. It's just about awareness and preparedness and hopeful prevention. And we're thinking maybe a trickle down effect lead to some prevention, but I don't believe there's going to be an all out prevention. But one of the things that people have to understand is that an individual has to do what that individual feels is in the best interest of that individual. And if it's a law enforcement agent, they are going to go after these offenders like with a passion and a zeal that you have never even seen before.
Yeah.
If it's the offender themselves, you might see them get defensive in a way you've never seen before, like that initial FBI scenario that we opened the episode up with.
Yeah.
If it's an institution, the institution has to do what is in the best interest of the institution, and they have to protect themselves, and they're not going to let themselves get caved in, whether it's a city, a community, or whether it's a church. And so a singular occurrence, or even some occurrences within a huge church of like 2 billion people, is not indicative of systemic, in my opinion. Now, some people are trying to say it's systemic or whatever, and they're trying to point fingers at the vows of celibacy or whatever. But I don't, you're talking about in general, like Christianity in general is like the largest religion in the world with 2 billion adherents, Islam right behind it, close number 2 with almost about 2 billion adherents. And then there's the other religions for the most part. A lot of Asia, with China is agnostic, or they're into the nature Buddhism or Hindu, things like that. But these 2 main ones, whether it's Islam or Christianity, and it's inside Christianity, whether it's the Catholic faith or whatever, I don't think there's systemic. And for the most part, I think your religious institution is a foundation and stands for as much as it can for everything that is good and virtuous in society. And it should be a safe haven and a boon for runaways and those messed up in the head or whatever. They should be able to go to their family, their parents, other family members, or church clergy and say, hey, I've got some troubles, and
I got some problems. Yep.
Yeah, counselors or clergy in the schools, even private schools or whatever, and or churches, should be able to help. And I think in 90 some odd % of the cases, they actually help. And it's just these one-offs. So we talk about these one-offs for that reason, to be prepared in so far as if you ever see it occur, you're not like shocked, like, oh my God, how could this occur? You're still going to say that.
Yeah, right.
We know of another small church in Oklahoma where some family members were going there, and they were saying, this kid right here, he's like 15 years old and whatever, and he's saying he's got violent tendencies. And he says he wants to do something to this little girl. For a long time, they ignored it. They ignored it. They ignored it. And whenever it came out to him actually naming a girl and saying, I'm really having fantasies about this one little girl, the church had to take some actions on that. And I think that church that we knew of in Oklahoma actually kind of dissolved as well, because there was affluential members of the family involved in the church that were obviously, of course, that the boy's parents. And there was the pastor and his family members that were trying to do the best thing for the church, but there was a majority of the people in the church that were just too afraid of the situation, and they just went to a neighboring church.
Yeah,
so
right.
In that scenario, it's not saying that there's some sort of systemic issue. There's just these one-offs, and it's these one-offs that Matt and I in this discussion that we're hoping to prepare you and make you aware of. And this Mama Bear site that we're going through, I think one of the points right here is someone spends a lot of time viewing pornography. Pornography is one of the ways that they groom the child. They want to make that normalized for the child. See, look, like everybody does this. This is normal. Right. It's normal for us to be naked. We only wear clothes when we go out. When we come into Uncle Bob's house and everybody goes away, you can run around. You're 4, 5, 6 years old. You can just be naked, and Uncle Bob's going to be naked too. That's what kind of a grooming scenario. You get into different levels of grooming when it's maybe, say, like a high school teacher, male or female. They're in their 30s or whatever, and they're grooming the 16 or 17-year-old student. So there's different levels of grooming. So all those types of red flags are in here with this Mama Bear effect. Female offenders.
One thing, actually, before you go into female offenders, one of the things I thought was interesting is there is a portion also in the Mama Bear effect where it talks about the 4 steps that an abuser follows, and it's pretty simple, right? It's they gain access, they capitalize on trust and authority, they break down any boundaries, and then they maintain control and secrecy. And so I think we'll be touching on a bit more of this, but those 4 areas, that's, I think, one of the neatest things about this Mama Bear effect is it talks about it reflects on an abuser, what that abuser does, how they attempt to access that child, how they attempt to influence that child and essentially and effectively control that child when it gets to that point in time. So
so there's some things here with the female offenders, and we're not going to read them. We've already let everybody, if you're able to see it, you can see some of the stuff on the screen, or you have the tools that you can read through this more. There's juvenile offenders. What you can do to reduce the risk of abuse, educate, empower, educate the people we trust, and build a body safety circle around the child. You're safe here. You can tell us anything. That's why Matt and I previously said you don't want to, shame
the child, or
you don't want to make your child feel too ostracized, or like you're spying on them too much, or that they can't come to you, etc. Empower children to know their rights and be prepared to defend them. Minimize the opportunities. And you speak up and let them speak up. If you witness something, whether it's the creepy looking guy in the children's park or playground, or whatever else you witness, and there's maybe some instances you might be able to intervene, but for the most part, we're recommending, because of that FBI scenario, you observe and report. Just report this and let the cops deal with it, because they're more trained, knowledgeable. They can actually maybe run a background check on this guy and say, oh yeah. And they may not tell you. They don't have an obligation to tell you, or they may say, oh yeah, by the way, we found out Fred over here next door neighbor, he's on the registered sex offender list. So good call. What you observed there, we'll be keeping an eye on him. And then they can do a close patrol of your neighborhood, make sure Fred is staying within his bounds.
Right.
You made a good observation. and you observed and you reported, and you didn't endanger yourself or anybody to where this guy may get on the offensive, not just the defensive, but the offensive.
Yeah. So one more point I would make around that is we also want to be careful that Ed, you mentioned it earlier in the show today, and that's we're not here to just send up all these alarms and everything. Oh my gosh, this is such a huge thing going on. We want people to be aware. This doesn't mean that every old man in your neighborhood is a sex offender and a child exploitation expert. This not what we're saying. And there are definitely signs that you can look for. This Mama Bear site will help people understand what those signs can be.
Exactly. So there, guys, I'm going to cap it off and summarize everything Matt and I have gone over in this podcast regarding preparedness and awareness and hopeful possible prevention of child exploitation scenarios. In general, we're talking about child sexual exploitation. Sometimes that's produced, adults are producing CSAM, child sexual abuse materials. We've gone over the FBI news from February of 2021, where a couple of agents in Florida were killed by a child sexual predator. We've gone over geographical risks worldwide in general and talked about criminal enterprises. Most of these criminal enterprises, whether they're involved in overall basic human smuggling or narcotic smuggling, weapon smuggling, whatever all else they're involved in, they're probably also involved in a little smattering, at least, of sexual material producing, whether it's adult and illegal, or it's adult and legal, or even children stuff. Probably children stuff. The international criminal organizations probably try to avoid that in general, because that's one headache that they don't need at all, because that's the kind of stuff like terrorism that is going to get the whole state to come down on you, because there's actually a violence and criminality continuum where a little bit of drugs and other vice and other things like this is expected at this level, or revolution and stuff, protests and stuff like that, they're expected at this level. If you cross that line and get too criminal as far as like child sexual issues or too terroristic, that's where you are not going to have the support of any consumers anymore, or your some of your fellows, and that's where you're going to come get a whole state body of enforcement levied against you. So there's a continuum there that you have to understand. There's law enforcement that's all over it, whether it's the FBI and Homeland Security, Canada Services, their law enforcement agencies are very good and effective on all this. Trust them as much as you can. Observe and report. The websites are up there for Thorn. Enough is enough. Statistics are out there. The red flags of child sexual predators from the Mama Bear Effect are all out there. And that is, in summary, what our podcast today covered, guys. Matt, are you ready to move on to parting shot, sir?
I am.
I'll let you lead with the parting shots.
58% of parents say they don't feel prepared if their child were to have a nude of them leaked.
Oh God, I would lose my mind. I'm not prepared.
It's frankly, we shouldn't be prepared because it shouldn't happen, but it does happen. As we found out, statistically, 40% of kids these days believe that's perfectly natural. Like that's something they should be doing, because apparently that's what a lot of them are doing.
They think that's what the cool kids are doing.
And that's not right. And I think the best way to overcome these challenges that these kids have, they don't know. They just don't know, because they're being taught this stuff by, social media, by other people in their groups. The only way we can overcome that and even slightly combat it is to maintain that relationship with our kids. And so So do that. Ensure you maintain that relationship with your kids. So that's number one. The second thing that I wanted to do is, again, just recap the 4 stages of abuse. Good. So you've got, if there is a person who is seeking to exploit a child, they first want to gain access. Second, they want to capitalize on that trust and their authority. So if they're an adult, they want to use that authority over the child and say, well, you should want to do this because I am an authority over you. They want to break down boundaries, anything that might stop them from being able to get in closer to the child. Yep. And then they want to maintain control. And the last thing that's super, super important is secrecy. So teach the young children about secrecy. There's difference between, and this is one of the things Mama Bear Effect goes into, the difference between secrecy and surprise, right? Surprise, meaning we can keep a secret about a surprise birthday party or something like that, right? Yeah. But we don't keep secrets that no one will ever find out about. Those are secrets, and secrets can be dangerous. So we need to make sure that we're able to share those with trusted adults. So those are 4 areas I think that are really, really important. Just understand those 4 stages of an abuser. And Mama Bear Effect, thorn.org. These are excellent, excellent places. Again, I would separate those out into 2 different areas. Mama Bear Effect being typically younger children, and you'll see a lot of their documentation is around that up to 10 or 12-year-old. And then there's the thorn.org, which is much more the 13 to 17-year-old, which talks about the sexual exploitation through social media and those type of things, and Snapchat, those type of areas. So and that's all I had for today, Ed. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. And for my parting shot, I will just reiterate preparedness. From a preparedness perspective, awareness overall, and thereby hopeful slight prevention, maybe 1 case or something like that. If we can prevent 1 case of a kid, like when I was doing counterterrorism type intelligence type operations, if I worked on one report product a year where I helped save what I consider a good guy, or we helped facilitate them capturing or killing a bad guy, I considered that a win. If I was a cop, or in this day and age, if I helped capture a child predator, or I helped prevent 1 child predator scenario, I would feel like my life was complete almost. So it's something I'm very passionate about, because the kids, man, there's a point in time, like kids, you do not, I don't care what age you want to cut it off at, but for me personally, it's like about 13 or so is just completely off limits for anybody. If they're, it's a boy is 15 and there's a 13-year-old girl and they're kissing or something like that, that's like a little different. That's a whole different discussion. We're talking like generally like 30 to 65 plus year old adults, generally males, sometimes females, and we're talking like 5-year-olds. That's just, I just can't, my brain can't wrap itself around it. I will not tolerate or accept it. And I want to do everything I can to spread as much information to anybody who wants to listen to about ways to possibly detect that, information sources for awareness, what to do if you see some of these red signs. Call the police. Don't approach, because they're getting dangerous. And overall parting shot, thanks for having me on the show, Matt. Thanks for letting me pilot this one. It's a passion of mine, and it's a huge key thing right up there with like terrorism, child exploitation, not acceptable. And I know, guys, it's there's a lot of gray areas, and it can be extremely sensitive. Different ages of different kids. Is it your 15-year-old daughter? Is it your 17-year-old daughter? A nude has leaked. How do you handle that? personally, I don't know. I'm not prepared for that myself, even though we've talked to our daughter about her previously perusing a website called Sugar Daddy,
Yeah.
things like that. We weren't prepared for that, but we talked it through. We maintained the relationship.
Yeah.
We're not outcasting her or labeling her or anything else like that. We just said, hey, there's also charities against this kind of stuff. If you want to donate to a lot of, I think Ashton Kutcher's Thorn takes donations. They're working on a huge database of offenders and the red flags and everything else like that. I watched Ashton Kutcher's speech about child exploitation that he delivered for Thorn.
Yeah.
It's very impassionate as well. I think Ashton's heart on this issue is in the right place. If there's one celebrity or actor out there that you could get behind, it's probably this one for this purpose, because this isn't just like any other, like, oh, we need to stop this political issue over here. This is not this is kids, guys. Safety of children. This is not politics. And I'm not telling you to donate to Ashton Kutcher or anything. I'm just saying that that's another thing out there for you. The information's out there. I really loved and enjoyed presenting to you as best as I could in the time that we have, and not going overboard too much. And we don't want to create fear or panic. The statistics are up, but there's certain reasons that the statistics are up. So don't freak out, think it's all in all the churches and that every kid in all high schools is always doing this kind of stuff.
Right.
Or every old man out there is trying to pick up on a 5-year-old or anything else like that. The statistics are up because of the internet and mobile phones and devices and stuff like that. Plus, banks and other financial institutions and other aware people like us are reporting it more to law enforcement, and law enforcement is getting those tips. Keep those tips coming in, guys. If you're wrong, that's okay. The cops aren't going to tell that guy, well, hey, your neighbor right over here is the one who knocked you out. He thought you were, doing some kiddie stuff.
Yeah.
The cops aren't going to say that. So if you have a tip, just give it to the cops. They may have different policies with different departments on whether or not they can recontact you after you report. If they can, maybe they'll say, yeah, just so you know, that guy down the street over there is on the sex offender list.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, see something, say something, guys. Report it. Don't try to intervene directly in most cases. And again, it was an honor to share this information that I think is very important.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I will let you say adios to our audience, Matt.
Well, hey, thanks for joining us today. If we can prevent just one, I think it's absolutely worth it. So thank you to the audience. And for now, this is Matt Marshall signing off.
Ed Wasson signing off. Thank you, everybody.